Dear students, today I am going to discuss a famous poem by Robert Browning, My Last Duchess. About the poet, Robert Browning was an English poet and playwright whose dramatic monologues put him high among the Victorian poets. He was noted for irony, characterization, dark humor, social commentary, historical settings, and challenging vocabulary and syntax. In 1846, he married fellow poet Elizabeth Barrett and moved to Italy. By her death in 1861, he had published the collection Man and Woman. His dramatic persona and book-length epic poem The Ring and the Book made him a leading poet. By his death in 1889, he was seen as a sage and philosopher poet who had fed into Victorian social and political discourse. Societies for studying his work survived in Britain and the US into the 20th century. Introduction to the poem. The poem is about an Italian duke who has supposedly killed his first wife and is now planning another wedding to another woman. He displays a painting done of his dead wife in his house and reveals it to a visitor who is made to see it and admire it. In Robert Browning's poem My Last Duchess, the Duke of Ferrara addresses an emissary of the Count whose daughter the Duke intends to marry. The Duke begins describing his deceased first wife while admiring a painting of her. She was a kind and courteous woman who was easily pleased. Though the Duke's descriptions are at first flattering, it becomes clear that he resented the Duchess's attentions to others. The Duke sinisterly remarks that he gave orders resulting in the Duchess's ultimate silence. The poem concludes as the Duke reveals his intention to marry again. Context of the poem. The poem is set in a time and a place that is the Italian Renaissance, when art was heavily valued within society. Browning was interested in this time period and results in the focus of the poem being the Duke's artwork. Specifically, the portrait he made of his now dead first wife. The conflict within the poem is subtle but displays itself in the power the Duke has over the Duchess' life. There is also a conflict between how the Duke presents himself to the outside world versus his Duke's true character. Conflict arose when the Duke realized he could not control his wife and he retaliated by killing her, which is an abuse of his power and control. Major themes in the poem. The poem explores theme of jealousy, possessiveness, and the abuse of power. The Duke of Ferrara's character flaws such as his ego, vanity, and need for control are revealed through his speech. The Duke's possessive nature is evident in his desire to have complete control over the Duchess' behavior even in death. Genre of the poem. The poem is a dramatic monologue, which is a speech delivered by a character in a play. The Duke's character is shown through what he is saying, allowing the reader to build an opinion of him. My Last Duchess by Robert Browning is a dramatic monologue that features a single speaker, the Duke of Ferrara, who shares his thoughts with a listener and the poem's readers. The poem uses a painting of the Duke's late wife to dramatize the viewer's responses to the artwork. The poem is written in rhyming couplet, iambic pentameter, and features a lot of enjambment, which means that sentences don't end at the end of the lines. This gives the Duke's speech a flowing quality, making it seem as if he is in complete control. Summary of the poem. The poem is set in Renaissance Italy and is narrated by the Duke of Ferrara, who is showing a painting of his late wife, the Duchess, to a visitor. Through the Duke's speech, the reader learns about the Duchess' personality and behavior, as well as the Duke's own character flaws. The poem begins with a subtitle announcing the setting, Ferrara. In the first line, the speaker gestures to a portrait on the wall of my last Duchess, who looks as if she were alive. These details, along with the subtitle, indicate that the speaker is the Duke of Ferrara and that he is discussing his deceased wife. The Duke admires the artistry of the portrait, which was rendered by a painter named Fra Pandolf, and invites his addressee to take a seat. The Duke says that strangers, such as his addressee, who look upon the Duchess portrait always seem to want to ask the Duke about the depth and passion of her expression, just as the addressee does now. In saying this, the Duke remarks that he keeps the portrait behind the curtain that only he may draw aside. The Duke then begins to answer the question, pointing out the spot of joy on the Duchess' cheek. He suggests that his presence was not the only cause of this blush. As he worked on the painting, Fra Pandolf requested that she draw back the cloak covering her wrist and later noted that his painting should not hope to depict the half blush on her neck. The Duke suspects that the Duchess falsely interpreted these comments as compliments, provoking the depicted blush. The Duke expands on this last observation, nothing that the Duchess had a heart too soon made glad. In his view, she lacked discernment, reacting to everything she encountered with equal appreciation and enjoyment. The Duke lists several examples of things she reacted to favorably. His compliments on her breast, a view of a sunset, a cherry branch presented to her by some officious fool, and the mule she would ride. These various objects or events elicited the same appreciative response from the Duchess, usually a word of approval or a blush. The Duke brings up a final example, one he found particularly maddening. The Duchess would thank many men for the various gifts they offered her, but she viewed these gifts as being equal in value to the Duke's greatest gift to her, his 900 years old name. Apparently, her very title as Duchess meant no more to her than anything else. In response to the Duchess' lack of discernment, the Duke felt that he could not raise the issue with her. It was such a minor matter that the Duke would have embarrassed himself to criticize her for it, even if he had the eloquence to make such a complaint, which claims to lack. He would have debased himself in trying to correct her behavior, whether she would have taken the advice to heart or retorted with a justification or an excuse. The Duke finishes this point by saying, I choose never to stoop The Duke adds that the Duchess always smiled when he passed by her, but he reiterates his criticism, nothing that everyone who passed by her received the same smile. He then enigmatically remarks that this trend continued until he issued some commands, at which point her smiles ceased altogether. Now the Duchess only exists in this portrait where she stands as if alive. The Duke then invites his addressee to rise and go with him downstairs, where they plan to meet others. He brings up the business for which the addressee has come to his estate. The addressee is an emissary for an unnamed count, and the Duke clarifies his intention to marry the count's beautiful daughter. Citing the count's wealth and generosity, he underscores that he will request a considerable dowry and that it will be appropriate to do so. Before they head downstairs, the Duke asked the addressee to look at one more artwork, a bronze sculpture of Neptune taming a seahorse. It's a rare piece, completed for the Duke by Claus of Innsbruck. Poetic devices used by Browning. Here, various poetic devices has been used by Browning, such as imagery, metaphor, and personification. For example, the Duke's reference to the portrait as a theme and his wife as my last duchess are example of metaphorical language. The portrait is also personified in the poem as it is described as having a 900 years old smile. In a glance, uh, My Last Duchess, published in the year 1842, poet Robert Browning. Structure or form of the poem: dramatic monologue in continuous form, iambic pentameter, rhyme scheme AABB, that is rhyming couplets are used here. Poetic devices: allusion, enjambment, rhyming couplets, and rhetorical questions. Frequently loaded imagery: smiles and blushing. Tone: ominous, threatening, arrogant, jealous, and possessive. Themes: relationship, gendered expectations, jealousy, and possessiveness. Hope you have understood the poem. Thank you for the day. Have a nice day.